Greetings, fellow Who-gazers, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you to the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. This week's book is a milestone for me. It was part of the third ever batch of Target novelizations I bought, or rather, had bought for me at age 11. It was the first of those books that adapted a TV story I'd already seen. And boy, oh boy, do I love that yellow spine cover. Canary yellow. Later books will have similar hues on the spine, but none again this bright. And I celebrated the book, at age 11, by writing cast lists on the inside covers in my terrible tween handwriting. Check out the photos on Twitter. I put the cast lists for parts 1 and 2 on the front cover inside, and then parts 3 and 4 on the inside back cover. Now, I got some of the character placements wrong, but hey, I was copying out of the L'Officier program guide, which I bought the same day as Ark in Space, and that book didn't tell you which characters, or in this case, voices, appeared in which episode parts. Now, I didn't keep the habit up for very long. I think the only other book where I wrote the cast lists inside was Genesis of the Daleks, which we covered here back on episode 23, and this book, and that would be it. Have a content warning for you. Up until this point, this podcast has been very positive. Hey, it's the novelizations. Why get angry? The books mean too much to me to do that. But over the course of the next hour, my guest and I, the fabulous Stacey Smith making her third appearance on the show, will occasionally drop the mask of civility and just unleash, harsh, go to town on some other innocent corners of the Doctor Who universe. I assure you, even if you're the author of some of the works in question, that when I savage bits of Doctor Who, I do it with love. Still, you're about to hear some Jason Unplugged over the next hour. I'll try to be nicer in the weeks to come. Coming up next, Stacey Smith, and the Ark in Space. Let's get to it. So, Stacey, welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. You were my very first ever guest in episode 5, and here we are at episode 32, and this is your third appearance, making you my third three-time guest. You have this habit of not sitting still, so I imagine you've probably visited 7 or 8 different countries and written 3 or 4 different books in the last few months.
I have indeed written several books in the last few months. I just signed off on 2 of them last week. Although I didn't visit so many countries because I got COVID and then I ran into visa problems going to Bangladesh. So I didn't quite make it to everything. But, travel is starting up. I know. I'm so proud to be the first guest. I feel like, I knew this podcast way back when and, now it's gone on to great things.
It has grown, but I just want to say that only you, and I've known you for about 25 years, only you could drop a sentence like, I had visa problems on the way to Bangladesh. For most people, that is the first sentence of their autobiography, the first sentence of their lifetime summation. For you, everything you say is the first sentence of an autobiography.
I mean, yes, somebody did describe me as a TED Talk waiting to happen. So,
So what are the 2 books that you signed off on in the last few weeks?
I just finished Outside In Walks with Fire, which is Outside In Guide to Twin Peaks. So I'd never even watched Twin Peaks before I did this Outside In, which was unusual for me. And then I binge watched it and loved it. And it's the shortest Outside In yet, but we have quite an array of writers, including David R. George III, who wrote an episode of Star Trek Voyager and many Star Trek novels and so forth, because he basically came on board and went, this is the most bonkers idea I've ever seen. I will totally do this. I don't normally work for charity, but here we go.
I will say in my defense, I declined an invitation to pitch for the Twin Peaks book because I too had never seen it and I didn't have the bandwidth to binge watch the entire series, which is kind of shameful because you have the bandwidth for everything, so I feel kind of bad sitting that one out. But I'll be back for later Outside Ins.
I have a dimensional fold in my bedroom. Makes life a lot more convenient. Yeah, the other book I just finished was the my popular science book on the top 10 diseases of all time. That one's been quite a while in the writing, but it's finally gone off, and I'm very excited about that one because that really hasn't nothing like that has been done before.
I remember you describing that book to me in the lobby at Galley in Los Angeles in February 2020, and you were saying that COVID was never going to crack the top 10. And then, of course, 2.5 years later, I imagine COVID has now entered the chart with a bullet.
So COVID has only just cracked the top 10, and it's only done it fairly recently. So, and in fact, I'm still not sure I even believe it. It's cracked the top 10 in terms of verifiable numbers, but verifiable numbers of diseases through history are very hard to come by. So the truth is we've had lots of diseases, and those diseases have been pretty bad. I mean, if you look at Spanish flu in 1918, right? So COVID in its first year killed about 2 million people. Spanish flu killed about 50 to 100 million people. I mean, this is a massive order of magnitude bigger. So as bad as COVID is, imagine how much worse it is. And also, there weren't as many people back then, so this was a per capita much harsher kind of impact. In some ways, we probably would have taken COVID more seriously if it was more deadly. And it was kind of in this sweet spot of like being quite bad, but not bad enough to kind of do more things about it. So that's, of course, just made it worse and elongated the process.
I will say that out of my 4 sets of grandparents who immigrated to the States, the last one to arrive came here because of Spanish flu, wiped out 3 of her 5 siblings in 1918, and they came here in 1920. So Spanish flu is a big part of my family biography in a way that COVID hopefully never will be.
Yes. I mean, congratulations on 100 years of your family in the continent.
That's right. Well, 102 years now, so I guess we're a little bit late on the party. So I've also been listening to some of your other podcast appearances, and you had done an episode of Reality Bomb probably about 2 or 3 months ago. And I made special note of what you said during that appearance because I knew that it was going to dovetail beautifully with your already standing invite to talk about the Ark in space on my little show. So Graham had done a segment on returning monsters from the classic series to the new series because this was in the run-up to The Legend of the Sea Devils, an episode which promised so much and delivered so little.
Just like all the Sea Devil stories.
I will defend Warriors of the Deep until the bitter end, but I'm the only one. I am the patron saint of lost causes, I expect. But you had made the rather bold assertion that you didn't want to see classic series monsters returning to the new series. And this confused me because wouldn't you say that Kerblam is the spiritual sequel to the Ark in Space, given that the big bad is Bubble Wrap?
Absolutely, and I think that just proves my point, right? That Bubble Wrap should have remained a classic. It's ruining my childhood seeing it in Kablam.
Oh my goodness.
Also, was it spray painted green? I don't think so.
It did emit colored poison gas, but I don't think that gas was green. Granted, it's been a while since I've seen Kerblam. But, among fans of Goodwill, you really don't say one story without the other. You just don't think of the Ark in space without thinking Kerblam, right?
Absolutely. I think we'll just take the exclamation mark from the end and put it onto the Ark in space. So it's the Ark in space.
Oh, my goodness. So we are here, of course, today to talk about the Ark in space. This is the first of the many novelizations written by Ian Marter. And that also does not count his original novel, Harry Sullivan's War, which I expect we'll get to on this program in a couple of years. So when you were on the show last time to discuss Doctor Who and the Giant Robot, number one, you told that incredible story about your close encounter with Peter Davison. And then secondly, after the recording, you volunteered to talk about Ark in Space, bypassing several other Terrance Dicks books, because we'd already talked about Terrance before. So what about Ark in Space or Ian Marter inspired you to want to run the gauntlet and come back to my show for a third time?
I think I just wanted a bit of a change from the Terrance Dicks potboilers. And my three appearances now have been Malcolm Holt, Terrance Dix, and Ian Marter. I mean, I'm on a roll here. Like, I'll see you again for Castrovalva at this rate. Uh, but I think the Ark in Space novelization is one of those ones that it sort of feels like it's in the generic era of kind of like, yeah, we're churning out regular Tom Baker stories like every month, and yet it's an astonishing book. Like it is a really like interesting work. It deviates quite a bit from the source material, but you can really tell that the author is working overtime to kind of like stamp his mark on the Doctor Who literature world. And at this point, Terrance Dix is, let's say, not doing that. He's already done it, so he doesn't need to. He could just turn the scripts over. But Ian Marter is like, I'm here with a vengeance, and I don't know, but I suspect Ian Marter might have had something to prove, right? Because he went from being a companion to a writer, and probably had to establish himself. And boy, does he with this.
So later on in this program, I am going to break down the text of Ark in Space. I want to briefly defend Terrance Dix before we stop talking about him for the rest of the hour, because I have been doing a close read of his books that came out right before this one, right? So he did in 1977, where Terrance writes 8 books over the year. He's already done Dalek Invasion of Earth, and right before that, he had done Planet of the Daleks. And then immediately after Dalek Invasion of Earth, he comes in with Claws of Axos. Now, I will say that he changed the text of those books quite a bit by reordering scenes. In Dalek Invasion of Earth, he makes some pretty drastic changes to a couple of major scenes. And then in Claws of Axos, he is able to bring in material that they didn't have time for the television program. So Terrance has a very, I don't want to say simple because it's really complex, but he makes it look so easy that you don't realize the work that Terrance is doing, and it's easy to overlook his genius. And that's pretty much the whole point of this show. I'm trying to find the literary merit in these books rather than just deal with them as disposable bits of fan fiction. So obviously, I'm not going to brook any bad words about Terrance on this program until we get to some of his later books, but that's a story for another day. So I want to say that what Ian Marter is doing is not unprecedented in reimagining the story, but looking at the things that Marter changes, he takes away all of Harry's sexism, which was an important part of the character, but fortunately was not a function of Ian Marter himself. And he rethinks the science of the story, and he just takes the violence and the horror and he ups it to a ridiculous degree. So
Yeah, he changes a lot of the nouns as well, and now it's Terra Nova, and there's like the like Technops and things like that. Like he's changed a lot of the kind of stuff there, and it feels a bit like just reading this original science fiction novel where you just sort of happen to know the plot. And so I mean, it's a bit jarring, I think, and I suspect when I first read it, I probably wasn't as familiar with the story, but like, I might have been a bit thrown by this, but reading it now, I'm kind of like, this is great stuff. I mean, I guess these days we have the ability to kind of, just watch the story whenever we want, and we all do with something like the Ark in Space. So therefore, this is a different take on it, and I think it's an excellent take, in part because of the diversions that happen.
yeah, you raise a really interesting point about the language, and I'll come back to this later in the program, but he has thought through the arc from top to bottom, and he has given a name, usually in all capital letters, to every different section of the arc. And like you say, he is imagining this very specific 30th century language. And it's similar on TV, where the Doctor and Virus spend a full 25 minutes in part 2 not understanding each other. But Marter has definitely thought through the language and how it evolves, and how these people from 1,000 years in the past, Sarah and Harry, are just a bit adrift dealing with this future society. Now, other Doctor Who stories set in the future are not really going to grapple with this. Possibly the Invisible Enemy, although that's not obviously nearly as great as the Ark in Space. But the language is something that Marter thinks about, which a lot of other stories just didn't take the time for.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it really is a spiritual successor to Robert Holmes' scripts, because I think that the story of the Ark in Space, they spend an entire episode just world building. The whole first episode is just wandering around the Ark and like establishing what's happening, and it's beautiful. It's a stunning episode, and so I think Marta has kind of taken like everything that we've seen there and said, okay, yes, now I don't have the restrictions of budget or sets and so on. So where do we go next with that? And just taken it up a notch, which is excellent.
his reimagining of the Part 2 cliffhanger, rather than Noah taking his arm from behind his back and showing off the bubble wrap, which, in Rodney Bennett's defense, nobody knew bubble wrap in 1975, where it's a little more ubiquitous. Thank you, Kerblam. Uh, Ian really just changes that, and he makes it a much more graphic scene using special effects that would not have existed in 1975. Nowadays, it would be done by CGI, and then 5 years from now, it would look cheap and ridiculous. But Martyr makes it a lot more. He actually has Noah's head crack open
Yes.
and mutate in the book, which obviously could not have been done on television for any number of reasons, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, he has a very visceral line of writing, and I mean, the prologue, for example, like is stunning. Like, you basically go on the journey with the Wirren as it enters the arc, and the word choices are just amazing. Actually, like I mean, like Martyr has been a little bit criticized for kind of like an over sort of reliance, I think, on violence and gore. And then, which he knew, because I think it's when he wrote the Reign of Terror, he the joke was on all of us because he left out all the violence and gore. But in Ark in Space, like you can tell, he's coming out of the gate and he's really interested in making this a very, very visceral read, and he works like a treat. I mean, I sort of had some sense of it coming in. I was like, oh yes, right, we're in an Ian Marter book. Yes, it's going to be all like sizzling guts and things bursting or whatever. But wow, is it mature in the way it deals with it.
So let's break that down into two areas then. And then I want to backtrack after that and talk about how you first encountered the book. But you mentioned both the word choice and the violence. Talking about the word choice, what do you think he did with the prose to make this stand out from other novelizations that had come before?
Yeah, I think he's like he puts a lot of effort into the descriptions. Whereas Terrance Dicks had an amazing way of kind of just very compactly like conveying something. And so Terrance could do it in a sentence, and Ian Marter spends pages and pages with no dialogue, just telling you about stuff that's happening. And usually that's the most boring part of a book. You kind of like hurry up and get to the dialogue, will you? And with more stuff, it's actually the best parts of the book. And we because it's obviously in the prologue, but then later on it'll just be in the middle of a scene. We'll just go into something, and I'm sort of like, I want to spend pages here. Like this is great stuff. And I think it's somehow he manages to slow the pacing down without making it boring. And that's a real trick, because I think sometimes you can read through like endless descriptions like treacle, but if you're seeing this happening the way that Marta does, you're like, this is so gripping, and I feel very invested in what's happening.
Just to give an example, when you get to the 1980s, you have a lot of these people who hadn't been involved with Doctor Who for 20 years who were being invited back to novelize their old stories because Terrance Dicks was no longer at a point in life where he could write 8 or 10 books a year. So
Yeah.
you have all these
Mhm.
old timers like William Ems and Paul Erickson and John Luca Ridey coming back to write. So obviously it's been 3 years since Notre Dame caught fire in Paris, and I had been there a few months before. So as soon as the thing caught fire, my very first reaction was I need to pull out my novelization of the massacre, because that is the book that does
Yeah.
for Notre Dame what Invasion of Time does the inside of the TARDIS. So it gives you the entire history, and the Doctor has this amazing thing in the book where he dates the year that they're in based on what the outside of the cathedral looks like.
Mhm.
So then I pulled out the book for the first time in years and I started to read it, and I realized, oh my God, is he ever going to write a sentence that is not a run on sentence? Sentences don't need to go for 3/4 of a paragraph. You could have turned 7 sentences out of this one. So later
Yes.
books in the series just demonstrate a real unfamiliarity with basic, simple prose.
Mhm.
I think what you're trying to get at, and I'll say it later, is that Martyr is doing a lot more atmospheric sentences, but I don't
Yes.
think he ever goes over the top. The sentences are dense, but they're all readable and they're enriching, but
Mhm.
they don't go on for 3/4 of a page like some of the books in the 1980s will do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And in fact, like I just had a look, and he varies the sentence length quite a bit, and so you get these very long sentences of description, and in the middle you say, patiently it waited. That's your entire sentence, right? And so, by mixing it up like that, of course, you're not just in this dreary like run-on sentences, which it has the possibility of being. I think one of the bits that really stood out for me was the scene of Sarah after having been transported into the glass box, and then she's about to go into the sleepers. That feeling of kind of like being trapped and being like basically like taken away from herself is incredible. Like just like how like it's both like I think he has a really good line in the external stuff, like the sort of like the blood and guts gore and Noah's head cracking open and the Weirin and so on, but also what's internally happening for Sarah as she's experiencing this is excellent. So I think he's very talented in terms of like not just being like one trick pony, which sometimes I think he got a bit dismissed as because like I think I understand why the blood and gore stands out, but I think something like this is excellent writing as well.
That's an interesting point about him being a one-trick pony. I think that as far as the writers go, he went out of his way to vary the doctors that he wrote for and the types of stories that he wrote because he ended up doing books for the first and second and fourth and fifth. So he starts off obviously novelizing Ark in Space and Sontaran Experiment, which comes out about a year and a half after this one. But then he does historicals, he does comedies like Rebus Operation, he does hardcore sci-fi like Earthshock, and then he does the worst story of all time, Dominators. So this is a guy who's always, and then after Dominators, he goes back and does the Invasion, going from one of the worst to one of the absolute stone cold best, even though the stories were almost right after each other on TV. So I think, and I'll have more time over the years to discuss this, I think he's probably one of the top 5 writers in the range just because he doesn't care who he writes for. He just wants variety. And he can do as much with a story that he was not involved with as he can for a story where he was on the set as an actor.
Yeah, I think I agree. And thinking about it too, I think that in some ways, he has the misfortune of he wasn't there right at the beginning, so he doesn't have that kind of establishment that say Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke had, and then he's not there later in the late '80s when there was a big revival in sort of what the books could do and so forth because he passed away in '86, and so he kind of like I think he missed the two great kind of opportunities for recognition. And yet he does amazing stuff in that sort of intermediate period, which is actually quite long. It's a sort of a decade or so, and he's producing excellent books like the entire time.
And the fact that he was only 42 years old when he died, I mean, that's 20 years worth of books that he could have written because it's 20 years from there to the new series. He could have done more novelizations, could have
Yeah.
done new adventures. He would have had a lot to say. Could have done missing adventures certainly.
I think he
So
would
that's
have
a
been
tremendous
excellent.
loss.
I mean, he does Harry Sullivan's War, so that's a sort of proto missing adventure. Yeah, he and I share the same birthday actually, and also he died on his birthday, which was also my birthday, obviously. And I remember being very haunted by that and thinking like, "Whoa, you can die on your birthday? Like that seems very shocking." And 42 when I was young seemed like not super old, but old, and now it does not seem very old at all. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you and I are now about 6 months past that, so to speak.
That's right, yes.
So let's backtrack a bit. So I know for me, Ark in Space was the first novelization that I bought where I had already seen the television story first. Prior to that, I had only bought books that I either hadn't seen on TV or had never heard of in the first place. Ark in Space was the first chance that I got to compare what I knew from TV. And at this point, I still had fragments of the television story on VHS tape and then the book. So both of these came really early on in my fandom. I saw Ark in Space probably not even 3 months into becoming a fan of the show, and the book was in the third set of novelizations that I bought. So again, I got the book probably about 3 or 4 months into my fandom. How about you? When did you first see Ark in Space, and when did you first read the book?
So we got a lot of Doctor Who on regular rotation. So Ark in Space, I would have been very young seeing that one, probably I started watching Doctor Who when I was 5, so certainly before age 8 or something, I probably saw it. So in some sense, it was always there. It was always in the background. The book was one of the ones in my local public library, so I had borrowed the book and read the book many times before I owned it. That was the hardcover version. I didn't buy the book until I started when I was 16. I decided I was really going to start collecting the books, and there was a secondhand bookstore, and I would wander up. There was a whole bunch of them, maybe 3 or 4 secondhand bookstores, and I'd wander into them, and occasionally they had a book here, a book there. But there was this one bookstore called Calderwood's, and I kept going to the science fiction section, and there was like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and a few other things, and not much else. And I kept sort of idly looking for Doctor Who books. And then one day I wandered in, and the woman had like a Doctor Who book like on her like desk, and she was sort of like stamping it because they put this stamp inside the books, which was really annoying. And it was like, oh yeah, Doctor Who books. She's like, oh yeah, they're back there in the children's section. And I was like, oh, I didn't think of looking in the children's section. And I went back there, and then there was like this huge number of books, and they were all really cheap. And Ark in Space was one of the ones I picked up in that original haul. And the books at the time sold for about $2.50, and I'm just looking at my copy. I think it was about 30 cents, it looks like. So yeah, it was a pretty cheap secondhand book. But it was like, I remember looking at it because it was such a large selection. I didn't have, maybe, I don't know, maybe I had $2 on me or something. And I was kind of like, I can only grab a limited number. And so I grabbed a couple of favorite stories. And I think I grabbed, Robots of Death, and I grabbed Ark in Space. And I remember I grabbed Slipback as well, because I'd heard of that one, but I hadn't heard the radio show or anything. And that was an exciting new one. But like, I sort of grabbed this handful of books and was like, oh my God, I've got this haul. And then Calderwood's bookstore became my go-to place for, secondhand Doctor Who books for quite a long time as a result.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that you, at a young age, gave your money away in exchange for Slipback, which certainly was not possibly worth the cover price or the time that it took to read. But I think you've reached a position in life where you've more than made the money back, so hopefully that doesn't sting and burn too much anymore.
I actually love Slipback. I got it on tape, and I used to listen to it down at our cottage. I remember I just played it, and my parents would listen to it too, and it was just on all the time. And so the novelization was, I found it funny at the age. It was probably fine for a 16-year-old. It was, a pseudo Douglas Adams, which I really liked. I mean, look at it now and it's not that strong, but at the time it was fine. So, yeah. But I will say, I definitely think Ark in Space was the more superior novel of the set that I picked up.
I will say that I am mocking a book that I have not actually read. Slipback was one of the last ones that I bought, and I got it at one of the conventions, and it's still in a little plastic cellophane wrapper. I will be getting to it in turn when I reach its spot in the publication order. But I have listened to the radio serial. When I was doing my pilgrimage, I made sure to listen to it in between seasons 22 and season 23. And I was just sitting there with my head in my hands going, what is he doing to my show? Maybe I'll read the book and decide that it is a work of genius. I know with Eric Sayward, I am a huge fan of The Visitation. I think it's the best book he's ever written. So I know he's capable of great stuff. Just having read his other books, I'm not so sure that he knows that. So,
yeah, I did read the Resurrection of the Daleks novelization fairly recently, and I was like, this may be the worst book I've ever read in my life. So, it's a range, yes.
Yeah, and I've reviewed most of his books for your ratings guide, so you can see most of my reviews on there. I will be getting to them, of course, in publication order. So, Visitation is terrific. Resurrection of the Daleks, I don't know what the editor was thinking in letting that through, because he's just clearly mocking a story that he doesn't like, and he's not treating it with anything resembling respect or even trying to rethink it or fix some of the mistakes. He's just deciding, okay, I wrote this 30 years ago, I can't change it. Let me just, number one, ignore most of it, and number two, hate on what's left. That is a philosophy I just don't understand. I mean, you might expect that on Reckard's Doctor Who in 1994, but it should not be published as a book 30 years later. We have a better way of looking at these things now. But that's enough of me ranting about Eric Sayward. We are here, of course, to talk about Ian Marter, nominally. So you bought this book when you were 16. How many times do you think you've read it over the years?
I would say probably about 5 or 6. I know I read it right after I bought it, and I haven't read it since until this week. So there was a long gap in the last, what, 6 months? How old am I? 30 years. And so, but before that, I definitely read it quite a few times. I remember I'd read it earlier that year, getting it out from the library. So I remember buying it, going like, "Well, I read this one recently, but it's so good, I want to own it." So, you know, and I would have read it a couple of times, I think, at the library. I was actually, as I was reading this book this week, I was thinking about when I was much younger, and my grandmother took me to a bookstore, and I found a bunch of Doctor Who books, but I wasn't allowed to buy any. So I just promptly sat on the floor and grabbed one and tried to read it as fast and as hard as I could. Waiting for my grandmother to browse or something, and I'm just hardcore reading, trying to absorb. And I don't even remember which Doctor Who story it was, but I was having a wonder if it was in fact the Ark in Space, because it was bringing up his memory.
I'll tell you my great Ark in Space story. So right now I'm reading all the physical books for this journey. But just out of curiosity, which edition do you have? Because I have the 1984 edition, where the Australian price is $3.95.
No, I have the second impression from 1979, and the Australian price is $2.50.
So inflation definitely took its toll.
Definitely did.
So about 10 years ago, I found that PDFs of all the novelizations are available through archive.org. So basically, they're public domain at this point, even if they're not. So I grabbed all of the PDFs and put them on my Kindle. Because at this point, my kid had just been born, and I was trying to minimize the number of physical books that I had, because obviously we needed the space for other things, like, the human being and clothes and toys and what have you. So at this point, I was putting everything on my Kindle and just taking my Kindle everywhere. And at this point, I was doing a random reread. So I was just reading one book a week, one episode per day. And then at the end of that, I go on a randomizer and pick out which book I was going to read next. And this went on for like 2 years. So in May 2013 is when the Ark in Space came up. So I read, part 1 on Monday, part 2 on Tuesday. On the Thursday, I am commuting to work, going from Brooklyn to Jersey City. And I was holding the Kindle in my hand, and I was halfway through part 4 during my commute. And when I was transferring from the PATH train to the light rail, that is when I went running to catch the train, because if I missed it, it was 20 minutes to the next one. And as I was running, I tripped over somebody who was wheeling a rolling suitcase down the platform. Oh. So I ended up going airborne, and I landed half in, half out of the train. And if you ever look down, there's a little metal strip that lines the inside of the train door as you're entering the train. You walk over a little metal strip to get to the car. My left elbow landed on that metal strip and shattered. The olecranon just snapped off, and I ended up having surgery the next day. And luckily, I had a really good surgeon and a really good occupational therapist, so I'm fully recovered. But the point is, not only did I break the elbow, my Kindle also went flying and broke and never worked again. So for a week or so, it was frozen on a random page from the Part 4 material in Ark in Space. So I'm lying there in the hospital, and I had a tablet, but I no longer had a functioning Kindle. So I decided that I was going to try and watch Ark in Space, which at that time was on Amazon Prime streaming, and I was going to try and watch it over hospital Wi-Fi. After about 10 minutes, I had made it through maybe 90 seconds of story. Plus, I was on heavy painkillers and had just had my surgery, so it didn't go very well. But that was the last time that I tried to read Ark in Space, and literally my Kindle was destroyed in the process of reading it, which I guess, given the violent content of the book, is pretty appropriate. But that's my memory of Ark. It was literally the book that I was reading as I had the worst injury that I've ever had. Fortunately, as I was reading it this time, there were no traumas, and I had a much happier time, fortunately.
Yes. Yeah, that's lucky.
So we've talked about the book. What about the TV story? Where do you rank the TV story among the greatest or the not greatest of all time?
Oh, well, it's clearly one of the greatest. I mean, it is plotted to within an inch of its life. I mean, the fact that, like, the setup is so immaculate that all it takes is for the Doctor to arrive and go, oh, let me just fix a circuit, and everything unfolds from there. Like it is a beautiful, beautiful, like, he sets the pebble going and the avalanche just follows. And it rereading it, I was sort of reminded of like just how incredible this plot is and how it just beautifully unfolds, like step by step by step. So that episode 1 is just like 3 people wandering around, and by episode 4, like the entire human race is at stake, and like it's a like it's a sort of thesis about what does it mean to be human. And I find that really interesting because I was thinking if this was done today, the focus would be on the companion. Like, it would be the companion figuring out what it means to be human. But like, no, it's on Noah. Like, Noah is absolutely the key to all this. And Noah is not very likable. Like, when we first meet Noah, like, he kind of, like, Vira is kind of like, she's a bit cautious about the Doctor and so on, but she basically accepted. And Noah's like, no, they have to be executed. Like, they're clearly alien spies or whatever. This is even before he's been taken over by the Wirren. And yet he is ultimately the hero of this book. And you're like, and it's like, I think that's really great. This is such a clever insight by Robert Holmes, because it's like what it means to be human isn't just what it means to be like a nice human. It's what it means to be human at all. And it's just such a great treatise upon this subject, which is obviously so fundamental to all of us. And it just has incredible concepts like the human race in one room. You're like, oh, who thought of that? Like, this is amazing. Like it's like the human race is in a room, and you're like, wow, the stakes could not be higher. And like the Doctor's speech, obviously the indomitable speech is incredible. I'm cursing Ian Marter that he cut a little line or two here or changed a word there, because that speech should be sacrosanct. So,
yes,
that is amazing. But it's just like the I think the contrast between sort of like Noah holding up the bubble wrapped arm and the sort of voice of the High Minister echoing throughout, and beginning of part 2, you're just like, this is. Oh, sorry, part 3. You're like, this is an amazing juxtaposition that they're having here of like, you are the inheritors of the earth and you are the survivors and so on. And here's this man who is half that and kind of like, deciding. And then there's sort of, basically suggestions at the end that like, actually, this was Noah's plan all along. And you're kind of like, every single bit of it is incredible, I think, as a concept, and the execution is fantastic. I mean, we mock a few things, like we mock the bubble wrap, we mock some of the stuff, but like you look at the sets, like they are incredible for the time. Like I think you look at like the like even the setup, like the the archive of all the stuff, like really the arc bits that you see in episode 1, where you just got these little filing cabinets of like information is just there. Like there's so many little throwaway pieces about this. So yeah, I cannot praise this story enough. It is so magnificent.
absolutely agreed 100%. Yeah, I remember when I watched it for the very first time. Of course, at this point when I watched it, I didn't know where the story was going, but I was surprised that Noah was such an antagonist, but then becomes the focal point of the story.
Mm.
And you're right that in the new series, these guest characters don't really get 9 times out of 10 the same level of focus. And I want to give a shout out for Rogan as well, even though he's only in the second half of the story. His humanity is also what saves the day, because he obviously decides that he has to be the one to sacrifice himself rather than the Doctor in order for the rest of the human race to live. And he's quite a vivid, vibrant character, whereas Noah, of course, is much more dislikable the whole time until the very end when you realize what he's done. So when you have this small guest cast where almost every member of the guest cast gets a lot of room to breathe, with the exception of poor Libri in episode 2, it really does remarkable work with the writing and the casting and the acting. And I guess we should mention John Lucarotti at this point. I know I took a run at his run-on sentences earlier, but I do want to point out that he did write the original version of this story, which Big Finish has restored and recorded with friend of the podcast Sadie Miller as Sarah Jane Smith. Have you had a chance to listen to the Big Finish version of this, the original Lucarotti version of the story, the arc?
No, I'm not really a Big Finish person. I didn't even know they'd done that, although I'm not surprised. Yes, of course they have. So no, I guess I would be interested perhaps to sort of find out what they've done and what material they even had and so on. Yeah, because I'd forgotten about the Lucarotti thing. I mean, I think it's funny to me that like amazing Doctor Who stories can come out of like somebody's attempted draft at something. You got sort of Pyramids of Mars has that, City of Death has that, like this one has that. Like you've got somebody kind of like attempting it and it failing, and then somebody else comes in and builds off that. And okay, admittedly, the people building off that are absolute geniuses. You've got Robert Holmes and Douglas Adams in this list, so yes, they can really do things. But I think sometimes having a little step up can probably make a huge difference here. That it gives them some ideas to be like, okay, well, all right, we're going to deal with this kind of story. Where would we actually go with that? And I guess it's you're focusing more on kind of what to do there. I wanted to come back to your stuff about the characters, because I agree with Rogan is such a great character. I love that in the show he's played as very working class, which you just don't expect from kind of this space age kind of like people. But sure, why not? He's a maintenance technician.
Right.
He's got this kind of quite working class accent and stuff. But also Vira undergoes such a transformation through the story. And so she starts off as being just, kind of incredibly sort of cold, like almost autonomous. And then by the end, she does this dazzling smile. And you're like, that is an incredible journey of humanity that is largely pushed through the acting. Like, I think that one is really well done, but quite subtle. And so just, you get to the end and its life is returning to the Ark, and she just, has the jelly babies and just smiles broadly. And you're like, wow, yeah, life really is returning, not just in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical sense too.
The three best smiles in Doctor Who history, off the top of my head. Number 3, Julian Glover's smile at the Part 3 cliffhanger to City of Death. It is the kindest, friendliest, most avuncular smile, and he's doing it because he's just killed Professor Kerensky. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Number 2, Vira at the end of Ark in Space. I could watch a GIF of that over and over again. And number 1, I think you know what I'm going to say is the best smile in Doctor Who history. Number 1. What's your guess for my number 1?
It's Romana 2, for sure. End of Horns of Nimon, I think.
Absolutely, 100%. That's the one. You and I have had many conversations about that, of course, in the past.
Yes.
But yeah, Vira is definitely a close second for me. Then in the book, she's much more antagonistic, and that's probably a vestige of the original draft. But again, she's another character whose humanity, not in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense, definitely manifests over the course of the story. And what's even better is in the book, Marter has her as a little bit younger. I mentioned she has dark hair. On TV, she has this white streak in her hair, which you weren't really seeing a lot of on television in 1975. Mature, middle-aged actresses getting really, really strong, almost co-leading parts.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And and in fact that she's the only survivor of the speaking guest cast is quite amazing actually.
True. Yeah, so Big Finish has done original versions of Ark in Space and Revenge of the Cybermen and Genesis of the Daleks. So they've gone back to the original drafts by the original authors. And they have Tom Baker and Sadie Miller and Christopher Naylor as the Doctor, and Sarah and Harry. Of those 3, I've only had time to listen to their version of Revenge of the Cybermen, but I have the download on the Big Finish app of Ark in Space. So whenever I get a moment, which is not often because I spend so much time on this podcast every week, that is one of the next ones that I want to listen to. Maybe I'll make time for it now that I've recorded this episode. So I would recommend that, if nothing else, for Sadie Miller, who was kind enough to be on this show a while back. So before we move on to the last part of this recording, we've got about 10 minutes before that. Let's talk about sequels to Ark in Space, or other stories that build on its themes. We've already talked about Kerblam, but I know that you, Stacey, are writing a book. And this is with your co-author, Anthony Wilson. You are writing a book for the Bookworm series on the 8th Doctor adventures.
Yes, we are.
You've been working on this for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Been working on it 3 years now. Got a big stack of papers.
That's right. That's right.
But you have almost certainly, by this point in your 8th Doctor Adventures journey, gotten to Placebo Effect.
Yes, we have.
Could you say a few words about this fine, fine book?
I mean, this is the worst book probably ever written. I know I said Resurrection of the Daleks, but I'm going to change my story now because oh my god, it is appalling. It's meant to be kind of tongue in cheek, silly. And it fails at even that, like that low bar. It's got the Wirren and the the Famasi joining together to like the Olympic Games. You're like, it hurts me just even describe it. It is like actually the funny thing about placebo effect is it's not so much that it's bad, although it is. It's also really boring. And my common statement is always Doctor Who can survive being bad, it can't survive being boring, and so it's just dull. But one of the interesting things that it relates to this book is, of course, they spell Wirren with three R's. And that was a deliberate choice by Gary Russell. And he said, he loved this novelization so much. And so, actually, I think there's one point where Wirren is spelled with six R's or something, as they sort of elongate Wirren. And so it's the Wirren. Although I do notice on the back cover, at least of my edition, Wirren only has two R's. So I guess they were tricking people into this novelization before giving the big reveal.
Okay, you've challenged me, and I'm going to accept your challenge. You have thrown down the gauntlet, and like the Doctor in the King's Demons, I'm going to pick it up. Yep. Page 99. This is the episode 3 cliffhanger in mid-chapter. The shrill rattling reached a climax as the claw opened. The creature seemed to purr with triumph, uttering its own name. Wirren. So let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now, my eyesight ain't what it used to be, and I'm on bifocals and I need to be on progressives. But I think that's 15 or 16 R's in the word Wirren.
I make it 15, and I've got a PhD in mathematics, so
okay.
I'm calling
you can probably tell without counting. You probably know what 15 R's in a row looks like. But I want to point out, this book came out in 77. The manuscript was probably written in 76. This is before computers and word processors. He's not just holding down. He has to type the R key physically. Clack, 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 clack. Clack, all over and over and over again. Probably gave himself a busted finger just typing out the letter R 15 times.
Yes. I mean, it's quite funny and quite. I mean, it's an odd little change to give in. Especially the back cover doesn't do it. Like that's strange, because they're obviously going for something else, and the back covers are produced sometime before, and I don't know, maybe people just went off the scripts and so on. But yeah, it's such a weird thing to do. But I hated it in Placebo Effect. I didn't mind it so much in this one, I must say. I think partly because by the time it finally comes in, it's not right there in your face, and then it's fine. It's okay. It's we're under 3 R's. Yeah.
Just to give Gary Russell a little bit of a break, I've seen him speak at many conventions. He's a charming guy. When he writes these books, he's writing them out of a place of love for Doctor Who. And sometimes the choices that he makes are not choices that I would ever endorse, ever. But he truly wanted to pay homage to Ian Marter, and he wanted to pay homage to this change, the Wirren with 3 R's. So I respect that about Placebo Effect, if not a lot of other things. And I certainly have enjoyed other books of his much more than Placebo Effect. Just for me, it's a shame that the Wirren are this great idea, and unfortunately, the book that they're in really doesn't measure up to Ark in Space. And this leads me back to Big Finish. Last year, when I watched Ark in Space on the Pilgrimage, before I knew about the remount of the original script, it came to my attention that they had done a sequel, an authorized sequel to Ark in Space called Wirren Dawn. And I had just listened to their authorized sequel to The Seeds of Doom called Hothouse a couple of weeks earlier. I assume you have not listened to Wirren Dawn. I'm curious to get your take on it, because it takes place, it's basically a missing adventure, because there's a reference in the book. Noah talks about how the humans came to Andromeda and kicked the Wirren out of their ancestral lands, and now they're looking for humans as revenge. So the Big Finish episode tries to tell that story, but a female starship captain is infected by the Wirren partway through episode 1 and spends most of the next hour painfully mutating. And of course, you can't show somebody visibly mutating in an audio story, so they have to show it by her screaming over and over again over the course of an hour. One of the reviewers on the ratings guide described it as a snuff film. Now, it has what's meant to be a happy, cheerful ending. It's written by Nicholas Briggs, I think, but more so than placebo effect, I think it is one of the most misbegotten bits of fiction ever committed to any medium anywhere, be it print or film or, in this case, audio. For me, it just does every single thing wrong in a way that Ark in Space gets every single thing right.
Well, my only comment is to say I really hope the CDs arrived wrapped in bubble wrap.
Unfortunately, digital downloads do not come in bubble wrap, but
I
maybe
mean,
I will isolate the
the,
file from my phone and put that in bubble wrap and then smash it with a sledgehammer.
like a Kindle. Yeah. If only it was in bubble wrap when he tripped.
I'm being very cruel to bits of Doctor Who right now, and maybe you bring out the worst in me. This is meant to be a positive show. We're here to celebrate the books, and here I am harshing on books and audios and what have you. So,
So I will segue back to Ark in Space here because I think the genius of Robert Holmes is, well, one of the geniuses. He would just paint this tapestry in broad strokes about, like, yes, the sleepers and Andromeda and so on, and you're like, wow, I really want to know about that. Like, tell me more. And, like, in Towns of Weng Chiang, there's the Filipino army in Reykjavik, and you're kind of like, what is this? Like, we have to know. And yet you hope never to actually get there. Like, it's so much better when you hope to know but don't actually see it, because there's no way that seeing it is going to be better than your imagination. And I think that's the fundamental error of Big Finish, that they take the love of Doctor Who and they misunderstand it. Like, the love of Doctor Who for me was when I watched the Ark in Space. This is an original monster doing original things. It's an original story. Like the love of Doctor Who for me is like they're telling exciting, interesting stories that are largely original. And I think this is what gets lost in today's world, not just Big Finish, but like a lot of media, right? It's like we have to always go back to the well. And it's like, oh, this story will only be improved if we like put in more continuity and so on. And I love continuity as much as the next like Doctor Who nerd. I run whole websites devoted to like picking up continuity in books and so on. But I think that's the domain of fans. It's not really the domain of the creators. And I really, I find, once in a while it's fine. Like, the reason that the Master and the Keeper of Traken was so amazing, it's because you hadn't seen the Master in many years. And it's like, are we going to go many years without seeing returning monsters? Like, we just can't do it anymore. And we're kind of addicted to this thing, and yet we need somebody to be the adult in the room and say, no, sorry, we're cutting you off for a while, and to come back to the beginning, the Legend of the Sea Devils. Do we really need to see the Sea Devils again? Like, I just find this obsession with the past, and also lack of creating our own current original exciting things, to be very odd, and kind of comes from a very childlike place. And yes, I get the little like rush from seeing like an old monster too, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a rush from pornography, and I'd rather go on a date and have a seduction, and like, that would be much more preferable to me.
well, that comes easier for you perhaps than several other people I could mention if I happen to have the Paris telephone directory about my person. Uh,
You're
just
not wrong.
just to give a defense, I'm not wrong. Just to give a defense of Big Finish, when they are at their best, there's almost nothing better. Lance Parkin's first Davros audio is one of the best things I've ever heard. You have a couple of Big Finish stories that have been turned almost wholesale into new series adventures between Spare Parts and Jubilee. These are stories that inspired the new series as much as some of the books have inspired the new series. Big Finish is also right there. They have a terrific run of great authors. They are getting great voices. They are recasting a lot of the classic series companions who are now deceased, and they're just knocking it out of the park with some of the acting choices. They've gotten everybody from the new series. They have Derek Jacobi is doing Big Finish. I mean, that's an incredible thing for a company that started off doing the Sirens of Time on cassette, or that one story where the audio goes, "Doctor, that piano is trying to kill us," and the piano goes plink, plank, plonk. They've come a long way since their early beginnings, and when Big Finish is good, nothing is better. But it's just that when I was doing my pilgrimage, I was only listening to the Big Finish stories that sequel Tom Baker stories, and unfortunately, some of those are not my cup of tea. Deep breath. Whew. So, Stacey, we're going to play a game. And the game we're going to play is Guess That Cliffhanger. I am going to play you the video on our shared screen here of 3 classic series cliffhangers. You will have to guess not only the story title, but also the episode part. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Hit me.
Up the device. device now armed. Set capsule in motion. Hands over control to close position. Motor running. Capsule moving. As soon as the capsule is in position over the fissure, release it.
Dalek Invasion of Earth. I'm going to say episode 5.
And how did you deduce that?
As soon as you said penetration capture with Daleks, I was like, I think I know where we're at.
Speaking of games that you probably play at home.
I have no comment to make at this time.
All right. I'm going to give you 2 points for that. You got the episode and you got the story part correct. So let's see if we can challenge you with our next one. I will now roll the tape.
You are no longer necessary.
Look at me. No, no, please. What are you doing? Look at me. No! Look at me. I'm not going to harm you. Look at me. That's right. Look at me. Look at me.
Snake Dance, episode 3, I think.
And what led you to believe that's episode 3? You have the story right, obviously, because obviously it's a giveaway with the... But what makes you think episode 3?
It might be episode 2, now that I'm thinking about it. I think it just feels like... I think there's episode 3 is where they're in the village, and it's just a very vast crowd of people. It's been a while since I've seen that story, though.
I'll just say that it is one of those two. One of those two has one of the greatest, most graphic visual Doctor Who cliffhangers ever. The other one is one of the worst, least imaginative cliffhangers of all time. So do you want to give your final answer?
I'll give my final answer as episode 3.
All right, you are incorrect. It was, in fact, episode 2. The episode 3 cliffhanger is kill them. The resolution. Somebody else runs up. Stop!
Oh,
no!
Stop. Yes, that's right.
Christopher Bailey has this great line on the text commentary to the DVD about you have to take this moment of mild, random, contrived tension and turn it into a cliffhanger when nobody really cares.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, part 2 is great. It gave me nightmares as a kid. Part 3, not so much. All right, so far you've gotten 3 out of 4 points. 4 is passing, so if you get 4, you win. So that means if you guess either the episode title or the story part for the next one, you are going to be the winner. Okay, that was our third clip. Can you guess for the win, the story and the episode part?
The Demons, episode 1.
That was pretty much a dead giveaway, wasn't it? That's not one of the more obscure ones. All right, you've got 5 out of 6. That's not a perfect score, but it is passing, so we are going to announce you the winner.
Pretty sweet.
All right. So as we wrap up, Stacey, tell us what other books are you working on, or give us a recommendation for some bit of Doctor Who media or something else.
Yes, I'm working on Outside In Regenerates, which is going to be the basically the 10th anniversary of Outside In. And because our first book was on classic Doctor Who, we're redoing classic Doctor Who for our 10th anniversary. But also, our 10th anniversary is going to essentially coincide with Doctor Who's 60th anniversary. So it feels like the perfect time to be doing this. And so part of the reason is because the first Outside In book, I hadn't really conceptualized just how amazing the idea that I'd come up with could be. And so since then, all the books have been like quite different to what the original one was. And so I've basically said, like, let's use the Outside In ideas to really, really say something really fun or funny or just outrageous about classic Doctor Who. And yeah, so far, some people have really stepped up. So we've got some good stuff coming, and I can't wait to see more.
I remember when you pitched me for the first Outside In, you wanted to use my review of the Aztecs on the ratings guide, which was not really a review of the story, but was a review of the special features and some of the unfortunate clothing choice worn by some of the guest actors in the documentary. So
I still can't see that, yes.
I am glad that you ended up evolving the book in a much better direction than publishing that sort of thing in print. So what else are you reading or watching now in the Doctor Who universe that you might want to tell us about?
Yeah, I've actually been showing one of my partners some classic Doctor Who. So we were kind of like looking through like late Tom Baker stuff. So Nightmare of Eden and Horns of Nimon, and I just watched the animated Shada for the first time. So that was really cool. Actually, I was kind of like, oh, this is very fun to see. And I sort of feel like, Shada has been through so many different iterations of what it could be. And this sort of finally feels like the final definitive version, which is settled into something a little bit boring that nobody really cares about. And so that's probably where it should land. I was inspired partly by your review, because you wrote that review for the ratings guide. And I think we might disagree on Christopher Neame, because I think Christopher Neame is absolutely astonishing in the present day. Like, wow, has that guy evolved as an actor? He is incredibly menacing.
Yeah, I think I actually made that point in my review for the ratings guide, which I sent to you. I don't think it's gone up yet. But I said that he's much better in the 2017 material than he is in the 1979 material. He finds the character 38 years later.
Yes, exactly. And it's really, really incredible what he's doing. Like, yeah.
And did you get to the surprise cameo at the end of the story?
Yes, I didn't even know about that. Just watching, and I was like, "This is a bit weird." Okay, wait, what? What am I seeing? Yes, no one had spoiled that for me. Your review is up, and you had not spoiled that for me either. So.
I think I referenced it, but I didn't actually say who the return guest was. I was trying to spare your feelings.
Yes.
Yeah, I am not a big fan of Shada the story. I think it really wants to be City of Death, but it does less in 45 minutes than City of Death does in 10. Yeah. And at this point also, I'm all kind of Douglas Adams out. There have been so many books, both original books and new Target novelizations, that are nothing but one Douglas Adams pastiche after another. Granted, he was a terrific writer. Granted, he died far too young, and it's sad that he's not still out there writing new work. There are other styles of writing to emulate, and I think if every book is a Douglas Adams pastiche, then you're really missing a chance to have the diversity of the target range. There's other authors you can channel. So that's my... I've spent a lot more time in this episode ranting than I have in past episodes. But I've just read one too many Adams pastiche under the Doctor Who banner at this point, and I wish they would move on. So the last time that I watched Shada, I thought, we've been there, we've done this. I don't need to hear this kind of level of humor over and over and over again. So maybe I'm being a bit uncharitable, but I do like what the DVD does with it, and of course I love that little surprise cameo at the end.
Yeah, that was incredible. I mean, I think, like you said in your review, I wish they put the cliffhangers in. It's weird watching a 6-part story in one long chunk, or just breaking it up artificially.
The newest version on the Blu-ray, the Season 17 Blu-ray, which I have sitting out of camera here, still in its plastic cellophane wrap, not bubble wrap, but cellophane, that does divide the new Shada up into cliffhangers. So they must have deleted some material to make it fit the 25-minute slot. Mm-hmm. Have not seen that yet. So if you say this is the definitive version of Shada, there's one more to go, and that's on the
There's
Blu-ray.
never gonna be one, is there? Yes.
Will never be finished. All right, Stacey, thank you so much for bringing out the worst in me over the past hour, and we'll have you back on real soon.
I live to serve.
Doctor Who and the Ark in Space, written by Ian Marter, televised as The Ark in Space, teleplay by Robert Holmes, televised in January and February 1975, published in May 1977. At a time in the far-off future, Earth has become uninhabitable. A selection of humanity is placed, deep frozen, in a fully automated space station to await the day of their return to Earth. Thousands of years later, Doctor Who arrives. He finds things going suspiciously wrong, and the station under attack from the giant Wirren, deadly creatures who, in their lust for power, now threaten the future of the whole human race. Here's the first paragraph. Out among the remotest planets, in faithful orbit through the solar system, the great satellite revolved slowly in the glimmer of a billion distant suns, reflecting their faint light from its cold and silent surfaces. All within remained utterly quiet and still, but primed and ready for the eventual moment of awakening. Deep in its innermost structure, an atomic clock oscillated, waiting for the moment when it would cause a tiny electric current to flow, activating circuits which branched throughout the vast satellite, bringing it to life once more, out in the wilderness of space. Now, this is not Terrance Dicks. It's got too many adjectives. Remotest, faithful, faint, cold, silent, tiny. Now, Terrance used adjectives, especially the word gleaming, a favorite of his, but this is a richer, thicker, heavier paragraph. Here's another one. For a few seconds all was still. Then the creature moved. Again the sphere glowed, and with a sharp crack hurled it back across the chamber in a blazing electrical discharge. The creature cowered, uttering hoarse screams, as a stream of brutal shock waves pulsed from the sphere, blistering its body with burns. Staring at the clusters of delicate instruments, its huge eyes useless in the fierce light, the creature began to flail at the wall panels, as if searching desperately for something. All at once, a section of the paneling slid open. Fighting the searing bursts of radiation from the sphere, the creature dragged itself through the opening into a second, smaller chamber. Out of range of the spear, but now blinded and almost paralyzed, the intruder fumbled among the control consoles. Now, superficially, that could be Terrance Dicks. Certainly there is plenty of visceral descriptions of violent moments, but Marter brings in a perspective Terrance didn't usually work with, the five senses. You can feel what the monster feels. You can see what the monster sees and smell what it smells. This would be Ian Marter's biggest gift to the novelizations. The prose gets inside your brain and relays the five senses of the characters in the book direct to you. Page 10. The doctor was a tall, broad man with a riot of curly brown hair bubbling out from beneath a stylish felt hat. His generous face was animated with intense curiosity as his enormous eyes peered into the semi-darkness. His hands were thrust deep into the bulging pockets of a voluminous red velvet jacket, and the trailing ends of a long multicolored woolen scarf flapped around his legs. This is also not Terrance Dicks. Too many words, the description more dense, but similarly evocative. Adjectives and adverbs abound in the world of Ian Marter, but you still get the picture. And his description of Liz Sladen's voice on the top of page 11, a bright, laughing voice, is both wonderful and 1,000% accurate. Ian Marter was there, you see, and he knew what her voice sounded like. This is the first time so far in the target line that the novelization's been written by an actor who was there. So far we've had books from episode writers, from script editors who commissioned that episode, from two producers who oversaw the episode, but we've never had an actor who was in studio performing the story, giving us extra insights into what was going on there during recording. When Ian Marter tells you what the story sounded, smelled, and felt like, he'd most definitely know. But not only that, the studio floor would have smelled of paint and electricity and would have been hot. Ian Marter in the book, however, is telling you something different. He's telling you what the sets would have felt and smelled like had the story been real. Page 12, the space station is bitterly cold and has grotesque shadows. Tom Baker, so hard to capture in print, here has a voice that booms suddenly, a yo-yo that spins effortlessly. In years to come, we'll have authors who overuse adjectives and adverbs and write books that challenge the patience of the reader. But Marter, for as long as his books are, rarely wastes a word. Page 13. Fascinating, the doctor murmured. Fascinating. In his resonant voice, excitement, understanding, and wonder were mingled as he crept respectfully around the chamber. For a moment, his companion's discomfort gave way to amazement. Now, all of that is exactly what it's like at home, to hear Tom Baker's distinctive voice, and to see him act on screen in utterly alien ways. Page 14. Marter translates Liz Sladen's suffocation acting in Part 1 into equally devastating prose. Head spinning, heart pounding, the other voice is gradually receding into the distance. Quote, she felt herself gripped as if in a huge vice, her ears ringing, and her limbs were numbed. Page 16, Harry is not sure if he's dreaming or going insane. Marter pulls apart Robert Holmes's script and imagines what it's like to live in that world. He does it extremely well. Terrance paints the best word picture, but Marter actually programs a virtual reality helmet. Page 20, when being transmatted away from the couch, Sarah, quote, was very slowly and very gently being pulled apart. That's the first time that a Target novelization tells you what a transmat beam feels like. Ark in Space is a signal moment on TV. It wasn't the first Hinchcliffe-era story to be produced. That would be the trifling Sontaran experiment. But it was the first one aired. And coming right after the genial and comical robot, it boldly declares a new era of Doctor Who. A Doctor clownish last week, but this week whose first line of dialogue is clumsy, ham-fisted idiot. A story that prefigures Alien, about the horrific possession of human bodies here by insectoid aliens, juxtaposed against the inventive, invincible, indomitable Homo sapiens, as somebody once said. Marter gets at all these emotions of the book by writing the horror in the most personable terms possible. Now, I'm not going to read the whole book out, but the passages describing Sarah getting cryogenically frozen, bottom of page 26, top of page 27, convinces me that Marter must have been cryogenically frozen himself at one point. So convincingly does he describe it. And on page 36, Marter adapts the quintessential horror movie trick, the jump scare misdirection. Something had touched him on the shoulder from behind and pushed him firmly away from the wall. He staggered forward, mute with terror, and collapsed in a heap. My goodness, what just happened to Harry? Well, sir, he backed into a filing cabinet, and a drawer popped open and tagged him behind the shoulder. As you do. This style of writing extends all the way to the Part 1 cliffhanger, a jump scare on TV, but to which Marter adds several visceral dimensions of sight, sound, and feel. Page 41. On a sudden impulse, Harry darted across to the shaft and began clawing frantically at the smooth, sealed edges of the panels. Before the doctor could restrain him, he had sprung open a hatch the size of a door. He found himself staring into a dark cubicle, and for a split second he caught a glimpse of an enormous locust-like figure with gigantic eyes, looming over him like an insect Buddha. Then, as he sprang backwards with a scream of horror, something toppled slowly past him with a sickening, crunching sound. There was a clatter of brittle tentacles and antennae which fractured and scattered a gelatinous, cobweb substance all over him.
Homo sapiens. What an inventive, invincible species. It's only a few million years since they crawled up out of the mud and learned to walk. Puny, defenseless bipeds. They've survived flood, famine, and plague. They've survived cosmic wars and holocausts. Now, here they are, out among the stars, waiting to begin a new life, ready to outsit eternity. They're indomitable. Indomitable.
Not surprisingly, Marter chooses to make Harry the chief POV character in the book, our audience identification figure. On TV, we're never quite told if Harry is a licensed physician or merely a medic. On TV, Tom Baker tells us in Part 2 that Harry is only qualified to work on sailors. Now there's a double meaning for you. But in the book, Marter has him as a full-on physician, having the doctor trail off in mid-sentence before making the reference to Harry working on sailors. That's what she said. Or having Harry make a medical assessment of the Wirren corpse in Part 2, and his, quote, practiced eye caught the beat of a regular pulse in the wrist of Vira, who's just been revived from suspended animation. Can't tell you how many times after I first read this book at age 11 that I'd stare at people's wrists while in conversation, hoping for myself to catch the beat of a regular pulse. Not easy. Marter also smooths out Harry Sullivan's innate sexism, thankfully deleting the TV observation that Vira is a, quote, independent sort of bird, and later, his awful comment about fancying a member of the fair sex being top of the totem pole. Better, Harry in the book can measure height with his eyes, and everything is so much bigger in print. Vira is 2 meters tall. Not on TV she wasn't. And the Wirren prop in the book is 3 meters long. Page 50 has a deliciously long description of the Wirren's glistening, bubbling protoplasm, absorbing heat and life from the solar stacks. As it spread slowly over the surface of the reservoirs, the substance became denser, more opaque and brittle. Occasionally, the crackling globules formed weird nightmare shapes which swelled and then burst into long, twisting fronds, hissing and spitting like snakes. Colossal quantities of the precious energy were absorbed by the parasite bubbles, so that the vital systems of the satellite were increasingly starved of essential power. Marter has also thought long and hard, not about sailors, but about how the Wirren works, their entire life cycle. Page 56 has extraordinary descriptions of the Wirren protoplasm. Marter finds words like globular and pustular when describing the material. He talks about how it changes shape and rearranges itself in the solar stacks in an effort to infect the Doctor, who makes like Errol Flynn, and escapes by looping his scarf over a nearby stanchion and flying down to safety. Now on TV, the Doctor does briefly observe a Wirren eye forming and writhing, but the stunt work is Marter's own invention. One interesting change to the form of the novelizations is that by now, we're used to Terrance writing his books in 12 chapters, sometimes a little more, but never less. Marter instead divides the arc in space into 8 chapters, roughly 2 chapters per part. The book is essentially the same length as the 2 Terrance books which came immediately before, Dalek Invasion of Earth and Claws of Axos, such that in publication order, the 3 books run to 136, 135, and 134 pages respectively. But the chapters here are fewer and run longer. As Yogi Berra was once quoted as having said, 8 slices was too many to eat, so he cut the pizza pie into 6 slices instead. But Marter, given a story with a very small cast of characters and lots of rapidly intercut visuals, prefers long atmospheric passages, dripping with adjectives and adverbs, such that this doesn't feel like a Terrance book at all. Fewer jokey or sarcastic or acerbic asides. This is instead a work of pure horror. One thing Marter does do, like Terrance, is have Sarah scream in the book where she did not on TV. Page 60, when she sees the Wirren corpse, a, quote, terrifying hoarse cry that ripped through Harry's head, and which leaves her with, quote, wide, panic-stricken eyes. To be fair, he has Noah scream too, and Harry. The early stages of Noah's infection by the Wirren slime, a fate the Doctor narrowly avoided a few pages earlier, is as graphic as it gets. Let's take a look at page 62. There was a hideous sensation in his injured arm, as if a column of stinging ants was forcing its way through the veins. He squeezed through the opening into the access tunnel and dragged the shield shut. He leaned against it, gasping for breath, and tried to remove the glove from his damaged hand, but the helmet had steamed up and he could not see properly. Whimpering with pain, he fought to remove the helmet, his spasmodic breathing echoing inside it. At last the helmet came free and smashed on the tunnel floor. Noah dropped to his knees, and then slowly keeled over on his side. His eyes bulging with terror, he brought the injured arm across in front of his face. The deep tear in the sleeve was filled with a greenish bubbling pus which, as he watched, seemed to be absorbed into his arm, so that only the blackened gash in the sleeve remained. With a harsh cry, Noah rolled over onto his back, the injured arm grotesquely fixed in the air. His whole body went rigid, his arm lost all sensation, and he blacked out, A wisp of acrid smoke curled up from the scorched slit. Chapter 4 is called A Fatal Wound, a double meaning leading up to the Part 2 cliffhanger. Both the death of Libri, probably the worst acted performance on Doctor Who since The Mutants, but fortunately a bit part, and Noah's infection by the Wirren. Marter continues to play up the horror. When the Doctor reveals what the Wirren did with Dune, Sarah, quote, covered her mouth as if she were going to be sick. Also, cleverly, Marter has Harry recognize what the Humanies are. On TV, he mistook the word for the name of a Royal Navy frigate, but in the book he comes through with a science knowledge, via a line of dialogue that he reallocated for himself from Tom Baker. Here is one more representative paragraph of how Marter handles the body horror. Libri entered the control center, seconds behind Noah. He stood transfixed in the entrance, watching his commander staggering about the chambers, his breath rasping and rattling, eyes rolling and body contracted into a grotesque posture. His injured arm was held up across his face, and with his other hand Noah repeatedly tore at the glove. Suddenly he stopped. Shaking his head slowly from side to side, he lowered the injured arm in front of him. With the sound of water dripping into boiling fat, green pus began to bubble out through the seams of the glove, the thick material splitting like paper. Noah's murder of Libri on the next page is much more graphic than the simpler phaser blast on TV. He fires pulse after pulse at the young man until the dead body is welded to the metal walls of the chamber. And on the next page, Noah continues to shoot at the body again until it disintegrates into nothing, which probably serves to cover the plot hole of why Libri's body disappears in between Part 2 and 3 on TV at least. Page 74 renames the Wirren with 2 R's into Wirren with 3 R's, a change preserved by Gary Russell in the 1998 8th Doctor adventure Placebo Effect, which Stacey and I recalled so fondly earlier in the program. Sorry about that, Gary. There's a bit of a famous deleted scene on TV, Noah imploring Vira to kill him before the Wirren finish possessing his body. Marter returns that scene to the book, and on page 78, a horrific but fascinating detail. Then he reeled back with an appalling shriek into the airlock as, with a crack like a gigantic seed pod bursting, his whole head split open, and a fountain of green froth erupted and ran sizzling down the radiation suit, burning deep trenches in the thick material. This violence does come with the expense of characterization. Lyset and Rogan are the only members of the Ark crew introduced without any description of physical appearance or personality. This is not a problem for Lyset, who barely utters a word in the book before his eventual death. He's only in 8 pages, and his print dialogue is limited to his death scream. Rogan, however, is a major character in the back half of the story, so it's a bit of a shame that we never do get to find out what he looks like.
Keep back! Don't touch me! No. Keep back, I said!
Noah, tell us one thing. How much time do we have?
Time
Before the Wirren reach their adult form.
feels near. Very near. Tearing free and in the great blackness rushing through.
Noah and I were pair bonded for the new life.
Let's go back.
Marter does add realistic details that have remained in my head for decades. Harry doesn't just lose his shoes in Part 1 and make a wry comment about it in Part 4. In the book, Marter thinks it through, constantly describes Harry padding across the floor, or his socks sticking to the trails of Wirren slime. In Chapter 6, the Doctor's coat gets caught by a laser beam meant for Wirren protoplasm, and Marter goes on several times after that about what this does to the Doctor's omnipresent bag of jelly babies. He also plays up the threat of the Doctor being mentally possessed by the Wirren during the Mind's Eye experiment, with Vira brandishing a gun at him long after the experiments ended. Also, by this point of the book, Marter is using the TV dialogue only as mere suggestions rather than received text. More to the point, he's clearly mapped out the entire infrastructure of the fictional Ark, naming every part of the station and describing its function. He remembers that the solar stacks must be awash with powerful radiation, which itself becomes a character in the book, which it is not on television. Even Noah is wearing a radiation suit when he's infected by the Wirren. And in Chapter 6, Rogan compensates, for lack of oxygen by drawing power from the artificial gravity unit, which causes gravity on the Ark to diminish. Marter probably could have designed a real-life space station, given the level of detail he invents here. And he turns the end of Chapter 6, where you'd have expected the Part 3 cliffhanger to go, but that's already come earlier in the text, into a stirring essay about Sarah's bravery and the importance of her mission to drag cable through the infrastructure of the Ark. Quote, "They all knew that Sarah was about to risk her life in an appallingly dangerous mission. Sarah herself knew that for a journalist it was the scoop of a lifetime, but above all else in her mind was the realization that the future of the entire human race might now depend on her success. Sarah's Part 4 crawl through the conduits is nerve-wracking on TV, but in the book it's even more claustrophobic, more horror novel than children's book, more Edgar Allan Poe than Franklin W. Dixon. Marter reimagines Sarah's crawl and invents more twists and turns, literally describing her pace and panic and plight in nightmarish detail. I'll give you some examples. Page 113. Inside the conduit, Sarah was drenched in perspiration despite the intense coldness which numbed her fingers. She had to fight for every breath. Her knees and elbows were raw from scraping against the sides of the narrow shafts. Her hair repeatedly caught itself between her shoulders and the metal sides of the conduits, forcing her to continually retreat a few centimeters in order to release it. The smooth sides afforded her nothing to grip on. She could move only with a kind of caterpillar action, which was terribly exhausting. She contracted her body, pressed her knees against the shaft and then straightened her body, pressed her elbows outwards and finally drew her legs along after her by contracting her body. She had to repeat the awkward sequence over and over again. She was often close to despair. And just when you think it can't get any scarier, page 115, she soon found herself in a section constructed of translucent material. Her pounding heart missed a beat as she recognized, through the thick glass-like material, the subdued glow of the solar chamber. Rogan's voice came whispering through the earpiece. It seemed to come from the other side of the universe. "Quietly now, Sarah." She froze as from the depths of the solar chamber there loomed two enormous eyes. Helplessly, Sarah stared back at the Wirren crawling towards her, its gigantic mandibles working hungrily. The creature gripped the tube with its tentacles. In vain, Sarah tried to flinch away from the slashing razor hairs as they squeaked against the conduit only centimeters from her body. Marter invests an almost impossible 42 pages on the Part 4 material, giving him time to add extra detail and extra frights into mankind's last stand on the Ark against the Wirren. All those adjectives and adverbs fly by, and I find myself turning pages faster and faster. There's a lot of language, but it's never bogged me down. The details instead help illuminate the scene for me and improve the TV visuals. Chapter 7 closes with a tense battle between the Doctor and Sarah versus an adult Wirren in a pitch-black cryogenic chamber, far and away more detailed and frightening than the much smaller corresponding moment on TV. The book scene ends with Sarah falling backwards into the desiccated, disintegrating corpse of the original mummified Wirren Queen and fainting dead away at the end of the chapter after the live Wirren has been repelled. Which does set up a minor plot hole. If the Wirren Queen arrived on the Ark ages ago and laid its eggs inside Dune, why did it take so long for the baby Wirren to emerge, only after the TARDIS finally arrived so many, many years later? Do Wirren eggs naturally take centuries to hatch? Even Ian Marter doesn't answer that question, though of course it hardly impedes one's enjoyment of the overall story. And it's not all horror. There is heart-tugging sentiment, similar to how Terrance Books, as we discussed in episode 30, allowed Dortmund to have one final moment of triumph against a lone Dalek invading Earth. Here, as the Doctor tries, at first in vain, to revive Noah's dormant sense of humanity, Marter writes to close the scene, Noah broke in with a prolonged, sighing voice which sounded through the chambers long after the intercom went dead. "I have no memory of the Earth." And Marter, writing this after his time on Doctor Who had ended, we're in TV terms about 18 months past his final on-screen appearance in the Android Invasion, even though the book is about 3 months away for this show, retroactively plants the seeds for Harry's departure from the TARDIS. Marter writes of Harry, he was staring gloomily at the video scanner, wishing there was some simple way of returning to his office at unit headquarters and forgetting all about satellites and giant locusts and traveling police boxes. Marter rethinks and expands the business with the launch vessel, in the book having the Wirren literally start chewing their way into the hull. Rogan's death scene is slightly restaged and made more graphic. On TV, there's a tug-of-war between Richardson and Morgan's intelligent performance. The actor hesitates before descending the ladder from the launch vessel bridge, clearly knowing that he's going to have to sacrifice himself in the next scene, against odd 1975 vintage jokes about outer space labor unions. Robert Holmes's political leanings briefly intruding into the narrative of what's otherwise one of the greatest stories of all time. The book gets rid of the union joke and instead plays hell with Rogan's dead corpse. Page 134. As Rogan released the last clamp, he was enveloped in a deathly chill. The air was sucked out of his lungs and the blood began to boil in his veins as the docking section depressurized. A few moments later, the launch area was filled with a searing plasma discharge. Rogan's body was transformed into a shapeless and colorless crystal in microseconds. Ugh. Marter keeps the ending on television mostly intact, Noah's innate humanity saving the day as much as Rogan's self-sacrifice, or Sarah's perilous journey through the Ark infrastructure, or the Doctor's clever work rigging up an electrical field around the cryogenic chamber, or Vira's calm leadership, or Harry's penchant for delivering wry jokes while not actually doing anything. Marter does slightly tinker with the ending of the story, changing the Doctor's mode of transport from the Ark down to Earth, from transmat beam into the TARDIS, the mode of travel that plays out in the next story, the Sontaran Experiment, which will be Marter's next novelization, but which is about 18 months in the future for the Target line, and thus several months away from being discussed on Doctor Who literature. However, as I read this book again, for the umpteenth time, I am effortlessly transported by Ian Marter's imagination to this future world. This is a book that, as I said earlier, plays on the five senses. You see, you smell, you hear, you feel what's going on in the Ark. Marter gives POV to just about every character. You feel Noah's transformation from the inside out. You experience the death scene of Rogan, which is pretty horrific. You feel Sarah's claustrophobia. This is a book that, quite frankly, has it all. And Ian Marter is fortunately, happily going to stick around for about another decade. He will do a double handful of Target books, including Harry Sullivan's War. It is tragic that the author was taken from us too soon, but he leaves behind quite a legacy, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface of Ian Marter's legacy with Doctor Who, here on Doctor Who Literature.
Doctor, where's Rogan?
Rogan's dead. I woke up in a protection hatch.
Doctor, you're safe.
Yes. We're all safe now, Sarah, thanks to Rogan's bravery. And perhaps something else.
Something else?
Yes, some vestige of human spirit. Was Noah on our side and one step ahead of us at the end?
You mean by leading the swarm into the shuttle?
Look.
Space Station Nova. Shuttle's blown up. He must have known that that would happen. Noah deliberately neglected to set the rocket stabilizers.
More than a vestige of human spirit. It can all begin now, Vira. Mankind is safe.
Next time on Doctor Who Literature, June 1977, and another novelization that I bought after I'd seen the TV story first. Not because I wanted to find out what Terrance Dicks made of all those faces shown at the Dr. Morbius brain wrestling contest. No, because I wanted to find out just what word Philip Madoc was saying when he kept telling Kondo to take the Doctor to the laboratory. I mean, what kind of a word is that? That wasn't how we talked on Long Island. Much to my surprise, the word in question was not some new invented word, nor was it a palsied harridan, or a squalid brood of harpies. The book, instead, is the impossible dream of 1,000 alchemists, dripping like tea from an urn. It's one of the most quotable Doctor Who stories ever. It's the brain of Morbius. Next week. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. I'm Jason, your host and editor and producer. Special thanks to my special guest, Stacey Smith ? This podcast can be found on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all episodes at anchor.fm/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's DrWho Novels, and you can also find me on the Trap One podcast. I write about Doctor Who on Twitter using the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, that's DrWho Pilgrimage. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Next time we'll be discussing another novelization, and we'll again be joined by a very special guest. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.